Great, thank you. So I will convene our special meeting of the Burlington Planning Commission for Tuesday, December 20th, 2022. Welcome to everybody who's here. And this meeting was supposed to happen last week, but we ran into some challenges on that, so it was rescheduled for tonight. So again, thank you to everybody for being here tonight. First item on the agenda is the agenda. Are there any changes to it?
Yes, Andy, we're going to propose moving the schedule, which is item 8, in front of item 5. Figure you can get that away with, get through that quickly. And the other note is just that beginning in January, according to state law, we're no longer allowed to have virtual only meetings, and there will likely be a hybrid option. We can discuss later, perhaps, if you want to, how the commission would like to handle their own attendance.
Okay. Why don't we do that during the commissioner items? So I know we have a lot to get through tonight.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else? Any other changes?
That is it.
All right, we'll do the agenda as proposed by Charles, the changes. Item 2 is the public forum. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to the Planning Commission on pretty much any topic you would like. We do have 2 public hearings later on in our meeting. These 2 public hearings were continued from our last meeting. And when we get them, our priority on them will be for people who haven't during that public hearing yet. During the public forum, it's really open to whatever topics anybody might like to speak to. So Charles, is there anyone to speak during the public forum?
Just 1 second. We do. We have 3 hands raised for the public forum. We're going to start with Martha Lane, and then we will.
I'm not hearing you. It could be me or could be. Are others hearing Charles?
Yes.
I can hear you. Okay. Yes, Andy, we have 5 people who would like to speak in the public forum. We'll start with Martha Lang, and then we'll go to Sharon Busher, and we'll include the queue in the chat. Sarah Morgan is going to keep control of the queue. So again, we'll start with Martha.
Well, Martha, welcome.
Hello, welcome. I'm here to talk about the Trinity campus. For over almost a year now, you people have been discussing it. There have been 6 or 7 meetings, and I have not spoken at any of those meetings, but I've attended them and listened. Unfortunately, you have not in any way incorporated any of the neighbors' suggestions. It's very unfortunate. I have no reason to believe that if I made a suggestion, you would consider mine and incorporate it into your plan. So I want to say only one thing. I want to put UVM on the alert that if they do not have a pedestrian plan for the additional 500 students at Trinity campus, I will delay the building. I have too much property in between Trinity campus and main campus to let UVM run roughshod over my property. I want something that's legally binding, that will be very specific about how they plan to get an additional 500 students to campus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martha.
All right, Andy, next we'll go to Sharon Busher.
And if I could just, before we move on to Sharon, just Martha, to Martha and to anybody else who might be speaking during our public forum on issues that relate to the public hearings, I would just ask that we incorporate their comments into the public hearing. Just make sure that's clear. So, thank you. Sharon, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, good evening. I wanted to understand what you said, Andy. Did you say that if you already spoke at the public hearing regarding Trinity or the South End, that you were not interested in having people speak again during that public hearing. I wasn't clear.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So this is a continuation of the public hearing, and when we get to them, and normally when we just do it all in one evening, people would just have their one opportunity to speak during the public hearing. And so we're hoping to keep it the same way. But during public forum, certainly you could have an opportunity to speak if you'd like to. If you have any additional
Yes.
comments.
So thank you. Thank you. I thought I understood you correctly, so I will seize the moment. I wanted to make a couple of observations. Well, one concern, after the last public hearing, I spoke with a person that spoke at your meeting, and I don't feel comfortable divulging that person's name because I didn't ask permission, but they raised concerns about using the center line or the center of Colchester Avenue as the place to delineate where the setback is established. And I tried, unfortunately, I've been busy just like everyone else, and I wasn't sure how often that's done. That you use a center line of a street to determine a setback. And if indeed there are renovations going to happen on Colchester Avenue, I wasn't quite sure if that road shifted, what that would mean for a setback. And this raised some concerns for me, something new that I hadn't thought of before. And so I just wanted to understand that. And I don't have as much confidence in understanding where the setback actually now will be once they decide to build something. That's number one. Number two is just an observation as one of your faithful followers. I have, with the two public hearings tonight, I've seen a lot of attention paid to the south end. There was a work session at the city council. There was an in-depth discussion about the meaningfulness of residential and commercial and allowing the arts area to thrive and not stifle it. There was a lot of discussion, and I felt that the commission asked lots of questions, engaged thoroughly, and that's wonderful. With Trinity, I have not felt that. I have appreciated you holding the site visit, which I had asked for. I very much appreciated that. But I haven't felt that same level of engagement. I understand the difference. One is property that the city is going to control. The other is property that UVM owns and controls. But I still think the engagement should be there. And the concerns raised, like, I'm going to cite one thing, just one thing. That parking lot that is there, it's already covered. And the fact that, for me, that nobody really seriously explored building above it, as opposed to taking green space as the first place to put additional housing is very disturbing to me. So my comments are that I am disappointed in what I have seen as far as the debate or discussion regarding Trinity. And I don't say that lightly. I value and respect all of you, but I also value and respect the ward I live in and the land that is about to be developed. And I want it developed the right way with lots of good housing that will benefit us. And Andy, I know I've gone on, but I want to say one last thing.
Sure, go ahead.
The thing that we keep coming back to is that, and we talked about it at our Ward 1 NPA, is that no matter how well we partner with UVM to build housing for undergrads, and even grad students, unless UVM caps their enrollment, we are not going to be better off because at the end of 2 years, if they continue to grow, we're going to have more people living in our city as opposed to less. And so unless there is some real commitment by the city and UVM to address that issue, I think all of us are feeling like we're doing something that will not benefit us. And I'm very sad. UVM usually only is willing to do something when they can gain from it. And I don't think they're going to gain from this, really. Those are my comments. And I appreciate you allowing me to make them during public forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
All right, Andy, the next speaker, let me check to see, is Nick Persampieri.
Hello, Nick. Thanks for joining us. You could go ahead if you'd like, Nick.
Andy, we'll give Nick some more time. We will go to Todd Schlossberg.
Hi, Todd. Welcome. You're on mute, Todd.
I just want to make sure that I understand. I was unclear about what you'd said, Andy, and it's probably me because it's late, after a full day, but I want to make sure that I'm clear. If we want to speak to on a particular project here, in my case, the Trinity campus amendments, then we may just defer and there'll be public comment before the discussion or presentation. I mean, how does just to clarify that?
Yeah, when we have two public hearings tonight, one on Trinity campus zoning and one on the south end. And those are both continuations of the public hearings we had at our last meeting. So if you want to speak to those, that's the better time to speak. But if you don't have time to stay, you could certainly speak now on those items.
Both of those things are a little true. So I think I'll stick around and I'll wait. So
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Okay, Andy, the next speaker in our queue, at least, tell you what, we will go to Dan Castriano.
Thanks. And thanks for having us share some public input this evening. I'm Dan, I live in Burlington, and I just want to make a comment on both of the zoning changes and the ordinance and just in general. I think these are necessary but not sufficient reforms for the scale of both the housing and the climate crises. It's a step in the right direction, but a tiny step in the right direction. So we know that rental vacancy rates, there's less than 0.5%. We know that we live near a giant freshwater lake in the mid latitudes. Estimates for climate refugees by 2050 are between 200 million and 1 billion people. So that's both, people from California and Miami and Houston, internally displaced persons, and then huge swaths of the global South, places that are turning into desert and are becoming too hot for human habitation, particularly in the Middle East and South Asia and Southeast Asia. And so while these are steps in the right direction, these aren't solutions at scale. And we have to build densely, we have to limit sprawl, and we have to build walkable and bikeable, transit-centric, enjoyable places designed for people. And we have to do more. And that's really my message for this evening. And so thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll next go to Colin Larson.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'd like to foot stomp what Dan just said. The city of Burlington has already acknowledged that we are facing multiple crises ongoing, and we really have an opportunity here as we move into the future to build and develop smartly build and develop in a way that will produce income for the city, keep us financially solvent. And so when we consider things like, parking, when we consider things like density, mixed use areas, I think we really want to try and tear down a lot of the requirements that have been holding the city back in terms of that kind of development. We know what works from a financial perspective. We know what works from a climate perspective. We have models of this in other countries and in other cities in the United States. We know that not forcing people to use cars, not forcing people to drive or travel excessive distances to get where they need to go to the grocery store, to go to the bank, all of that kind of thing, that is better for a city. It's better financially, it's better for the climate, it's better for the air that we breathe. So I want to frame the discussions that we're going to have during the rest of this meeting in those terms. Let's not commit to half measures. Let's make the bold decisions that we need to make to create a better future for Burlington. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles, who do we have next?
We have a moving queue here. We'll go to Jason Van Dreisch.
Jason, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for continuing this public hearing, and thanks especially for continuing it after December 15th. I was pretty busy up until that date. I'd like to comment briefly on both of the items that have a public hearing tonight. With regard to the Trinity campus, I believe it was Sharon mentioned how UVM is, well, I'm not going to try to paraphrase Sharon. The point I'd like to make there is that it appears that we have a moment of leverage here before this zoning amendment gets passed. And when the zoning amendment is passed, that moment of leverage is gone. My understanding is that there's an informal agreement with UVM now that they will build one new bed for each net new student admitted, that the city had a memo with UVM to that effect that expired some years ago, but apparently they're still adhering to those terms. To my mind, that's not enough. It basically means that they are committing to not digging the hole that they're already in any deeper. This would appear to be a moment when we have the opportunity to get them to commit to something better. Obviously, that's not a planning commission issue, that is an administration issue, but I would hope that there would be leadership on the part of the city council and the administration to negotiate a deal with UVM where, in return for this zoning change, which is very much something they want, they commit to building 2 new beds for every net new student admitted, so that we can start to actually gain ground again, rather than just not making the problem of not enough student housing any worse than it already is. With regard to the South End Innovation District, I'm very supportive of the proposal overall. As I canvassed for my city council campaign all over the South End, I heard a lot of support for the proposal. And what I can tell you is that I talked to probably 300 people in the space of a month or so, and this was a common topic of conversation. Support for the rezoning, support for building housing and mixed use in that zone was high, and concern about the height was also extremely high. Not just from the perspective of how it would affect views from neighborhoods, but also from the perspective of whether it would actually work for what we're trying to do here. I find it very telling that the images in the presentation that's going to be given tonight about the South End Innovation District all show 5-story buildings, not 8-story buildings. I think that's for a very good reason, which is that with 5-story buildings, you can still create a sense of neighborhood, a sense of community. With 8-story buildings, my very strong sense as an urban planner is that those buildings start to turn inwards. People go into the building, they head up the elevator to their apartment, and they live within the building. We have an obligation with major new projects like this, not just to build homes, not just to give people a roof over their heads, but also to create new neighborhoods, to give people a sense of community. Everybody deserves to live in a community, not just in a house. And my fear is that 8 stories is too tall for the kind of sense of community that the very buildings in your presentation clearly are able to support. So please, I encourage you in the strongest possible terms to dial back the maximum height to 4 to 5 stories as shown in your illustrations, and set the stage for really creating neighborhoods in this zone, not just housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Okay, Andy, we're gonna try Karen Long. Karen had emailed us to speak. Karen, I'm gonna allow you to speak now if you'd like to.
So Karen
Oh,
Long or
that's
or-
Carolyn
I'm
Bates.
sorry. Where did Karen go? Okay, Karen.
Okay, so I'm Karen Long. Thank you. I am calling in about Trinity. And I agree with Jason and Sharon that we need to take this opportunity to hold UVM accountable and not give them any special treatment and zoning changes. Because if they continue to increase this housing for just freshmen, we're going to be in really bad shape in 2 years when those freshmen need a place to live because there will be no housing designated for them. So I think the only way, and you can do this with a MOU, I think, or the administration can, that if they get to build, I don't know, I didn't know it was 500 beds, but if it's 500 beds, at least half of them have to be for juniors and seniors and half for freshmen and sophomores, because I live in Ward 1 and it's ridiculous how much of our housing is being taken up for students. UVM professors can't compete, and we want to keep neighbors. We want to keep, we like balance. And I just think that this is something you have to do for us, for Ward 1, for Ward 6, for all of us to keep that. And I do want to say, thank you for letting me speak. I didn't write in till this morning, but your agenda said, and it's not very friendly, like encouraging public participation, because it says you have to sign up or write before 5 o'clock the day before the meeting. Anyway, I think you should change that wording. I think if people hear about the meeting the day of, they should get to speak about it. Because we don't want to discourage public participation, or maybe you do, but I don't. I think people should get to speak. And the only other thing, and this is not something I pointed out, but at my NPAs, people have said that a lot of students don't want to live on campus, especially upperclassmen, because it's a dry campus. So if a student is 21, they shouldn't be expelled for drinking in their dorm. And the other reason students are moving off campus is that the dorms are very expensive, more expensive than renting a house or a room in a house. So those are 2 things that UVM can do to make it more desirable. I know they did a study before and they said juniors and seniors don't want to live on campus, but it's their responsibility to house at least 50% of this housing should be for juniors and seniors. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay, now we'll go to Carolyn Bates.
Carolyn, welcome.
I want to reiterate what Jason talked about, and I looked at the surveys that you all did in the summer, and the majority of the people said they wanted 4, 5, and maybe 6-story mixed housing heights and mixed use. And I'm looking at all the buildings around, and I did maps that I sent to all of you so that you could see what was on each piece of property or parcel, and whether it was land or what the building was size and what the lot size was. And the tallest building, Innovation Center, that's 4 stories. So why are you doing 8 stories? Downtown Church Street doesn't have 8 stories. Come on, guys, you're gonna put us all in the dark shadows in the winter. Who wants that? So please just don't make us be like downtown. Make us a neighborhood, make the building small and friendly with lots of streets and space. And I also really want to be sure you mandate green stormwater, that all the stormwater has to stay on site, not go into the lake, because we don't have the biggest wastewater treatment center here. And mandate that all of the roofs have green roofs, and that they use a lot of materials that have solar in them. There's solar shingles now, so that they could put that on. You could have solar, siding. So please, you didn't even include either one. And those are just really mandatory now in all buildings. Chicago has been doing that for 10 years. And I think New York City, at the same when it comes to green roofs, really cools the building down. And let's see, there were just gonna that you mandate that the people use local whenever possible, that we use local employees and don't go out of state, please. And that you use local materials, and that you get the very, very, very best. I want you to try to put a high line, all the green roofs interconnected like New York City. That is such a popular thing to do down in New York City. And if you haven't done it, do it. It's just amazing. And you walk up and down and all around, and you can do it here, and people will come to do it. And please try to get the most exciting buildings that you can, cutting edge buildings, because educational people will come here to see them. That brings in more money, more schooling. Who knows, it may be a whole class that you wrap around the building and the design of these housing units, so that they're net zero too. I mean, really, really push the cutting edge and mandate it. Don't just say, we'd like you to do it. I guess that's all for now, but definitely get that height way down, please. Thank you. And thank you all for listening. Merry Christmas to everyone, and thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Okay, Andy, we've got 4 more in the queue. We'll go to Jack Tiano.
Welcome, Jack.
Hi, my name is Jack Tiano. I'm speaking as a resident of the South End, and I'm also speaking as a member of VPOP, which is Vermonters for People-Oriented Places. I wanted to speak out in support of the ordinance to eliminate parking minimums. I think this is an essential step forward towards enabling our city to alleviate our housing availability and affordability crisis, and is also a critical step forward in our climate goals and giving us the option to build towards a car-free lifestyle and build more walkable neighborhoods. I also wanted to speak out on the zoning changes. As someone who used to work on Trinity campus, I'm excited to see these zoning changes to accommodate denser and more urban development. And as someone who lives in the South End, I'm also excited to see zoning changes that will accommodate the same here. I appreciate Jason's comments on the height boundary and its relationship to creating neighborhood, but I don't think that the zoning plan is the place to do that. There are other cities that create a sense of neighborhood in taller buildings, and I think this has more to do with implementation and ownership issues. So I'd like to see the option for 8 stories remain, perhaps 7 and up being a conditional use. And like some other speakers have mentioned, I think that these are all great starts, but that we need to push towards more comprehensive zoning reform throughout the city and to make sure that we're not thinking about these projects in isolation. There's a lot more that I'd like to say on these topics, but I honestly don't have much to complain about on these zoning documents. And I understand that the Planning Commission isn't necessarily the venue for the more holistic comments that I'd like to leave. So I'll save those for the City Council meeting in January. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Ryan Thornton.
Hello, thanks. My name is Ryan Thornton. I'm also speaking as a member of Vermonters for People-Oriented Places. I recognize there's not a public hearing on the parking ordinance, but I also wanted to express my enthusiastic support for removing parking minimums. I'd also like to speak on the Trinity campus zoning and South End Innovation District items. As you're aware, we're really nowhere close to getting out of the debt of housing that we have in terms of the demand. And so while I do appreciate the need for neighborhoods and more of a human scale feel, I think that we really do have to recognize that with the amount of climate immigrants coming and the amount of people who are already looking for affordable place to live, we really cannot consider whether or not 8 stories is comfortable for someone. And we really do need to be providing as much housing as we possibly can. So with that said, these items do look very promising, and I will concede the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next up is Michael Arnold, and then we'll go to Nick Piersanpieri. So Michael.
Well, Michael,
Hello, thanks. I just wanted to speak in support of both of the zoning changes. I just wanted to leave the idea that these are necessary but not sufficient reforms to address our severe housing shortage. I think it's time that the city takes responsibility for regulating land use and allowing enough housing for everyone who wants to live here, including the tens of thousands who currently commute into Burlington. Less than 1% of the city's land will be affected by these zoning changes, more than 2 years after a severe housing crisis that caused homelessness rates to double around the state. And these small changes are not nearly enough. With a rental vacancy rate of less than 0.5%, Burlington needs dramatic reforms over the majority of its land. I'd hope that the Planning Commission would start to plan to make enough homes to get us towards a 5% vacancy rate. And we should consider taking drastic measures to increase the rate of housing production within the city. And in terms of context, I'd ask that the Planning Commission consider allowing more contextual heights around the South End Innovation Zone. Something contextual like the Decker Towers, which are 11 stories on St. Paul Street, would be a reasonable height. Thank you.
Okay, we've
Thank
got Nick Piersanpieri. Nick,
we're not hearing you, Nick. At least I'm not.
Do you, Nick, if you happen to be logged in under 2 accounts, do you want to try, are you also on as just Nick?
Hi, I'm logged on as just Nick. I'm not the person who is stacked to speak, though. Just
Okay, okay, got it. All right. Then we are unable to hear Nick Piersanpieri.
Nick, if you would like to send me an email, I can forward your communication onto the Planning Commission. That is cdillard@burlingtonbt.gov. I'll put that in the chat. Andy, we do have one more, Carlos Esquivel Cordova.
Okay. Welcome, Carlos.
Hi. Yeah, I'm also part of this organization, VPOP. I know we've been talking a lot about climate change and climate crisis, which sometimes it sounds like a little bit of a problem that is not going to affect us like immediately. But I'm going to talk as in my experience. I work as a service provider for Pathways Vermont, and there's definitely a housing crisis. And this is not a problem that we can just like sweep under the carpet and just forget about it. Like it's already here. It's gonna happen. These people that live on the streets are gonna keep we're gonna keep gentrifying, and and this is gonna reach to the south end if it hasn't reached yet. And what we need is just like more density. That's what that's the root of the problem, and that's what's gonna help at the end of the day. So I just wanted to remind that, which, again, this is a nowadays problem that we have to take care of from the root. Thanks for hearing me.
Thank you, Carlos. Charles, was that it for the public forum?
That is it, Andy.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone who spoke. Some of the topics you raised we'll be talking about a little bit later this evening. So with that, I'll close the public forum and move on to item 3, which is the chair's report, of which I don't have anything to report right now. So we'll move to item 4, which is the director's report. Megan.
Okay, I'll be pretty quick just because we have a long agenda. we have reported in some of our recent meetings that a number of large projects that we've had on our work plan are getting going for us in the beginning of 2023. We've recently signed, we are getting ready to take a contract approval to the Board of Finance in early January for our impact fee study update. And we are also looking at proposals right now for the transportation demand management study, which we've talked a lot about in the context of the parking amendment. Between these and the other projects that we have talked to you about, Missing Middle and others, we would really like to think about how we engage you as commissioners in this work. These are big projects. They're going to be very complex. And so we would like to engage some of you in those projects throughout the work in anticipation of them coming before you. So we've started reaching out to a couple of you to see if you have specific interest in some of the projects that we're going to be working on. But just wanted to note that if anybody is interested in particular in participating in impact fees, transportation demand management, or Missing Middle, let us know, and we're happy to incorporate you as we stand up committees for those projects.
And I'll just add to that. Thank you, Megan, for those comments. And we as a commission will probably be focused on that at one of our later meetings as well, to make sure that we are, having commissioners on some of these various committees. But as Megan said, if you're interested in serving on any of these, let Megan or myself know, but Megan's probably easier to let know than me. And these are things I think are going to be really important work for us down the road. So,
and we'll
thanks in
certainly be a
advance.
big part of your agendas in the coming year. So the only other thing I was going to mention, we try to provide you some updates about zoning amendments that you've moved on to the city council. Obviously tonight you have the parking and transportation demand management ordinance back on your agenda, so I'll talk about that here in just a second. The other amendment that you have moved on recently was the public art, some technical changes around how we treat public art within the downtown form code. That one is going to be going for public hearing and adoption in January before the city council as well. So that's all I have for you for right now.
Okay. Thank you, Megan. Then we'll move on to the next item, which we rearranged a little bit. It was item 8. It's the 2023 meeting schedule. We have that in the proposed meeting schedule in our packet.
If you'd like, I can share the screen, but it's fairly straightforward schedule. We didn't have any conflicts with any major city or religious holidays, I believe.
So I think there are all the second and fourth Tuesday of the month.
That's right. And recall that in January, we will resume a hybrid meeting format, virtual and in person in the Sharon Butcher conference room.
Any questions from the commission or any comments on this? And the schedule has to be approved by the commission. Any questions or comments on it, or a motion to approve the schedule, the proposed schedule?
Should I have
Alex?
reviewed the schedule at this point, Andy? It sounds like it's the same schedule. It's twice a month, second and fourth Tuesdays. I'd like to make a motion to approve the schedule.
That sounds great, Alex. Thank you. Is there a second? Seconded by Michael. Any more discussion on it? And as Alex pointed out, and we were talking before, I believe it is consistently the second and fourth Tuesday of the month, which is our regular meeting schedule times. And with that, unless there's any more comments or questions, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye or raise your hand. Any opposed? That looks like it was unanimous then. Thank you for that.
And Andy, we do have one other thing just to give all the commissioners a heads up on. If you could please save the date for January 17th. It's not on your schedule, but we have been talking with Scott Gustin at DPI about resuming your joint meeting that would take place in collaboration with the DRB, the DAB, and the Conservation Board. So for the newer commissioners, this is something that we used to try to do once a year in January as a way to share updates with each other about kind of major planning and policy issues, hear feedback from the boards about their kind of work to actually administer the zoning ordinances that you all help develop, and just flag any other issues of common concern. So we are looking at trying to bring that back, and we'll be sending out a more specific request to confirm your availability for that as well.
Okay, great. And that was January 17th?
That's right.
Great,
I think
thank you.
that 5:30 is what we're looking at for that.
Good. Thank you. So with that, we'll close that item and move back to item 5, which is the proposed CDO amendment ZA-22-07, maximum parking and TDM. This is something that's we dealt with before, was with the council, and has come back to us for a final review of final comments of changes council made. Megan or Charles, do you want to tee this up for us?
Yeah.
Megan, if you wanted to say a word, it's fine.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to run this down really quickly. I think, as you know, you referred this to the city council back in the summer, I think in July. And both the city council and the city council's ordinance committee have had a couple of discussions about this amendment. Ultimately, this is being referred back to you under statute because the city council made some additional changes to it after your public hearing and referral. So I'm gonna just share my screen because this was not in the packet. We just got this from the city attorney's office just a little bit ago. So if you give me just
Megan,
one
I
second.
can share it if you'd like.
Oh, okay, that's fine, yeah. So quickly share one aspect of what has been changed is that at the same time this ordinance was under development, you'll remember that you were considering changes to the zoning for the BHS site on Institute Road. So the first change here just makes those two ordinances consistent with one another by specifying that those Institute Road properties are also in our multimodal mixed use zoning district. Or parking district, I should say. The rest of the changes that the council made really focused on the section of the ordinance that has to do with transportation demand management. So skipping all the way down towards the end of the document, if you could skip over the driveway element really quickly, Charles. The changes here are doing a couple of things. You may remember that the previous version of this ordinance that you saw included requirements to comply with all of our transportation demand management elements for projects that were over a certain size. So in this chart, you'll see them listed as applicable projects. And then there was a sort of alternative process for transportation demand management based on some of the feedback that you had shared, that projects of just between 5 and 9 units only were required to unbundle parking from the cost of rent or the cost of the unit. So after some discussion and quite a bit of feedback that the council received from a number of affordable housing development organizations, there is another tier that has been established here that are projects that are primarily affordable housing. So 75% or more of their housing units meet our affordability criteria in our inclusionary zoning ordinance. And our projects of significant size would only really be required to comply with some of the tenant education requirements. And the main reason for that is that the council heard a lot of feedback about the existing transportation demand management requirements not necessarily always being the right fit, either for the occupants of their buildings, the users of their buildings, or created an operating cost that their federal, state, and other funding sources do not necessarily provide for them to cover. So this is an acknowledgement that kind of building towards that TDM study that we talked about, that we have some finessing that we need to do in terms of how our TDM standards are applicable to different types of projects and different types of users. Within the actual transportation demand management program requirements, the council also made a number of changes. One is that within the education and outreach requirements, They acknowledged that for many buildings and projects, actually hosting an annual meeting and doing an annual survey, all of that work was not always the most productive way to get information in front of residents. So they have made some changes here that just simply require that information is always made readily available to residents to help increase their use and participation in these programs. It also changes the record keeping requirement from being a mandatory annual activity to one that happens upon the request of the city. Within the TDM plan strategies themselves, you may remember that the ordinance currently requires that for 10 years, eligible projects have to provide discounted GMT passes as well as discounted car share memberships, or in lieu of doing that, they can join a transportation management organization, so think like a CATMA, that is providing equivalent or better benefits. There has been a lot of discussion and feedback about the fact that transit is free right now, that CATMA memberships do not always afford the opportunity to provide these benefits to users of a building, and that this, again, lacks some of the flexibility that they heard about also from affordable housing developers. So in lieu of a sort of static standard, they have offered, it looks like 6 different options here for individual projects to select 2 of these different TDM strategies to incorporate in a TDM program that's specific to the site. Those have to be selected and submitted to the zoning administrative officer. And then there are also a couple of changes that were made in the parking management section. The first is an attempt to just clarify when priority spaces have to be provided, and that is not to say that these priority spaces have to be provided at every site, but when parking is provided, these types of parking spaces have to be prioritized. And they also lowered the requirement, the proportionality requirement for car share spaces. This used to say that 1 space had to be offered for every 20 residential units, but this now simply requires that 1 space must be offered for projects of 20 or more units. They talked about just the practicality of project sites hosting multiple car share pods. So then kind of within the context of all of those changes, if you go back up, Charles, to, let's see here, right here. At lines 495 and 496, there's an additional statement that talks about the ability to actually come back and get a transportation demand plan that has previously been approved, how it can be amended. So this enables people, if they have already come in and submitted a plan that complies with our previous requirements, this would allow projects to come back and get an amendment to that plan based on these new standards, which otherwise typically would not be enabled unless they were going through a major development project. And then if you go back up one more time, the last thing actually came from staff. On page 20, Charles, you may remember that in your discussion of this ordinance, we talked about exemptions. So situations that do not have to comply with the maximum parking limits. There are currently 5 of them, or there are 3 of them, and there are 2 others that you had recommended be added when you looked at this ordinance last. We have recommended an additional one be added, which is that parking that's in a residential driveway that's compliant with all of our other standards for parking in driveways be exempt from these limits. And this was really prompted by the fact that we saw someone who wanted to actually realign their driveway at their on their single family residential property, and was not able to, because under our standards and under our calculation of how many parking spaces that would have produced, it would have put them over the maximum parking limit, even though they were complying with lot coverage and all of the standards for driveway size and placement. So this is just another small exemption for situations like that. So this is an update for you about what the council has changed. And I think you're starting to get the hang of this. The reason this comes back to you is because under statute, if the council makes changes to an ordinance after it's been referred by you, that it comes back to you for two reasons. One is that the sort of staff report that accompanies it, which was in your agenda packet, you have the opportunity to update it, and we need to have you reapprove it. We didn't see the need to make any changes to the report, so it's just in your packet for your reapproval. But you're also afforded an opportunity to provide any comment to the council as they consider this amendment for the final time. So want to just open the floor in case there are any comments that the commissioners want to share.
Thank you. And with that, are there any comments from the commission? Not seeing any. Just Julia.
Yeah, I wasn't on the commission when this was under review, but I'm glad to see it coming back. And I think the addition of the provision that an application can come back and align with these standards is a really great addition to this document. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? And Megan, if I recall correctly, the ordinance itself had come from the council. And so most of the changes are actually ones that they're making to the draft that they had provided us to originally.
That's right.
Okay.
Really, the draft that they provided to you and that you sent back to them did not make many changes to our existing transportation demand management program requirements. The primary change was just to provide that other threshold for unbundling parking for smaller projects. So this makes a lot of additional changes to that section where you previously hadn't looked at any.
Okay, good, thanks. So, and we need to reapprove the report? Is that
That's correct.
Can you, Megan?
Go ahead, Michael.
Sorry. Can you just help me find what page the report is on?
Yes, the report is on, I believe it starts on page 4 of your agenda packet. So it's the staff report that summarizes the purpose of what this ordinance is doing.
So do we have a motion? And is this the same report that we had approved last time?
Yes, I think it's the same report. Is that right?
It is the same, yes.
So we need a motion if we so desire, to reapprove this report. Is there a motion to do so?
Question, are we reapproving the report or the changes that were shown on the screen? It's the report, right?
The changes that were shown on the screen were actual changes to the text of the ordinance. That was not in your packet. We just got that a couple of hours ago. The document that's in your packet starts on page 4. That's the report. And that's what we're asking for you to reapprove and send to the council.
Right. Okay.
And we don't have to approve the changes to the ordinance that the council made. We can give comment to it. We could propose other changes if we want, or we could do nothing about it. We don't have to, take any action on those, but I think we do need to take action on the report itself to reapprove that.
So
Michael?
I thought we in our report had talked about taking the TDM out of the I mean, I know that's not going to happen given council's review and everything, but I just thought that was in this, and maybe just because I'm looking at it too quickly, I'd missed this earlier.
Nope, you're not missing it. So kind of like what we're doing right now, you had previously been offered an opportunity to provide comment and you did separately. So this report states what this ordinance is doing. You had previously provided comments via a separate letter that went to the council stating that it was your recommendation not to include TDM in the expanded area.
Okay. So that was a separate, okay, that's what I was
thinking.
It was a
memo.
separate one. Because, for the benefit of the commission, these concerns from the affordable housing community on the impact of the TDM program or something that came up in some conversations I had. And, you know, I thought it was just important to note that we had some foresight to know that looking at this comprehensively would be most beneficial to the city. And, you know, at least my feeling is that that still is the case, but understanding we're really just, this is part of the process that we see this again. So to the extent this is being recorded and people want to have it on record, it now is.
Thank you. And is there a motion to reapprove the report? Alex?
I'd like to make a motion to that extent to reapprove the report. This isn't quite a complete boomerang, right? Because we've already approved it once but
We're pretty close to it, yeah.
I'd like to make that motion.
Thank you. Motion by Alex. Is there a second? Seconded by Julia. All right. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to reapprove the report, please say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? We have the report reapproved. And I assume also that we're not going to give any further comments to the changes that the council has presented us, that we'll just let them sit as they are. And I think that's pretty much along the lines, Michael, of what you were saying, is that we actually didn't want to see the TDM into this. We wanted to see a larger study done before we put in the TDM requirements. Almost like this is putting the cart before the horse, but it's the council's prerogative to do that. So we will let them. All right, then I think then we are done with this item. Anything else we need to do, Megan?
Not for this item.
Okay, good. So I'll close this out. Thank you for the motion and for everything. So we'll move on now to item 6, which is public hearing, proposed ZA-22-04 UVM Trinity Campus zoning. So as I said at the beginning of the meeting, we had started our public hearing on this at our last meeting. We had some technical difficulties during that meeting though, and we're concerned that not everybody who would have wanted to speak during the public hearing would have had an opportunity to do so. So this is now a continuation of the public hearing. And if you've already spoken during it, we'd really ask that you defer to the other people who haven't spoken now. Again, you know, we heard your comments at the last meeting, if you've spoken already. And Charles, and Megan, are you wanting to give a presentation before we conclude the public hearing, or go for the public hearing and let that conclude and then come back to your thoughts and comments on what we've heard?
The latter, Andy. We do have some very technical changes to the amendment that are not material or substantive that we would like to just review after the public comment and your discussion is concluded.
And we had the tee up to this item at our last meeting. So unless there's comments or questions from the commission or Megan and Charles, unless there's something you want to add at this point, why don't we continue with our public hearing and then we'll come back to the commission discussion on this. Anything from anyone first? Okay, why don't we reopen our public hearing then and continue with that? Charles, do we have people wanting to speak?
Yes, Todd Schlossberg would like to speak now.
Todd, thanks for waiting. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. I live on Ward 1, or at least Ward 1 as it's currently rendered, and we'll see what happens with that. But I lived here for 31 years. My spouse and I live on Loomis Street, and so I'm here to speak about this zoning amendment. And I very mindful and understand at the outset, I need to say that the Planning Commission in its, I see there's a draft letter or memorandum to the City Council. It's included in the package, and the Planning Commission has accurately reflected sort of the scope of what it can and cannot do, and that, you know, for example, holding UVM I don't know if a university has feet, but holding its proverbial feet to the fire and ensuring that they create housing is not within the scope of this planning commission's legal duties. That's a true statement. However, many years ago, I had I was on a publication at law school. It was called the Law Review, and the editor-in-chief once said that we're facing a vexing issue, and he said, "What about if we don't do anything?" And that advice stuck with me. And it's that sometimes the best thing and the most powerful thing to do is actually no thing. And so this is what I want to say is that I agree with the previous commenters who said that the city as a body here, the citizenry and our administration and the planning commission and its legislative body, the planning commission, is in a unique position right now because the city cannot limit university enrollment. The city cannot limit how many new students get taken. The city cannot force the university to build housing. And those of us who've been living in, watching neighborhoods, especially on Lower Loomis Street, go from largely, long-term rentals and owner occupied, going to predominantly student rentals and seeing what that does to the community and what it does to the availability of housing for working people. And it's heartbreaking, but there's really very little we can do unless we get to a inflection point like we have right now. The University of Vermont wants to build housing. It not only wants to build housing on Trinity campus, it actually desperately needs to do that. And I don't know if these statistics have been brought to your attention, and I'm going to be as brief as I can here. For many years leading up until into the 20 teens, university enrollment for enrollment of new freshmen, undergrad students, first-year students, was around 2,500. And then when you had transfers coming in, and the undergrad population was hovering around 11,000. But something changed, and we are at I think a crisis point that we hasn't yet come home to roost. But class of 2021, in other words, the fall of 2016 class coming in for class of 2021 was, according to UVM, quote, nearly 2,500. They didn't put the exact number. According to UVM, the class of 22, in other words, coming in 2017, was 2,530. These are first-year students. Class of 2023, so that's 2018, starting 2018, 26 and change, 2,600. So for some reason, UVM doesn't have any information, the details of class 2024 that I could find, but class of 2025, which is last year's, incoming class starting fall 2021, in the midst of the pandemic, but hopefully they started to have classes in person again, 2932. So just think about that, folks. It's about a 430 person jump from 4 years ago. And you might think, well, that's an anomaly. Okay. It's just a one-off thing. People are going back to school or whatever, we're bucking the trends. Class of 2026, this past August, September 2022, 3,000 students. Now I say 3,000 because the university, this is very odd. There are detailed enrollment numbers for the university. I'll just say they're not posted online this year. If I were a little more paranoid, I'd say maybe it's tied in with their request for this zoning project or amendments. But I did call UVM today, spoke to admissions, and I learned from an administrator there that information is not available. That was a quote. But then when I pressed them and said, well, it actually, someone spoke to the news a few months ago and said it was about 3,000. After a 5-minute wait, she got back on the phone and said, yes, it's 3,000 students, plus or minus a few. So where does that take us? 2,500 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 3,000 now. What does that mean? Well, we have 400 to 500 more students coming in that will be 3rd and 4th year students in 3 and 4 years. Last year's class was almost 3,000, this year's class. So what does that mean? We in 3 years, we'll have about 500 new students coming in, additional students beyond the capacity we've had. At year 4, we're going to have about 900 to 1,000 new students. Now, I'm not a math major here, didn't do very well in math, but I can tell you this. Let's dial it down to about 900, say it's 900 roughly new third and fourth year students we didn't have years past. Let's just say that housing, typical rental housing is on average 3 units or 3 bedrooms per unit. There's a lot of 1 unit, 2 bedroom housing, but let's just say 3. Divide 900 students by 3. Well, that's about 300 housing units at minimum that we're going to need. And you could say, well, gosh darn it, Todd, what are you making a fuss about? Trinity campus, they're going to build new housing. When we had the early public hearings back in the summer, a few of us raised, we said, well, are you going to agree to house third and fourth year students in this? And then we were told about this remarkable survey. Now, when you, not a social scientist, when you read the survey carefully, it's like 50% of people don't want to live on campus. Well, build housing for some of them. What about when you build housing that's affordable, feels like off-campus housing, it's off kind of in a wooded area by a ravine like the Trinity campus. So, the idea that people won't live there is kind of, a result-oriented polling process. But we're going to have, we're going to need roughly 300 units. And this is not way off in the future. This is in the next couple of years. That's just to sort of catch up to and I hate to use the expression, the upper class students who will be dumped into our neighborhood, but that's the reality. And these folks are not going to live primarily in wards 4 and 7 or 5. They're going to be living primarily in wards 1 and 8 and some of ward 2. So you could take a cynical view and say, well, that's a problem for those wards. Well, when you increase pressure on housing and increases rent rates, that affects the entire city. Now, maybe this isn't a problem for upper middle class, people who are in the upper, percentile of income, but this is a huge problem for working people. And this is real, and this is right now. So, at the risk of sounding like I don't want to sound like the folks who say, well, we have to hold the university's feet to the fire. We don't have any power to do that directly. However, this is not as points out on the Planning Commission's website, you are not a regulatory body. You're not deciding zoning projects. You're not deciding whether this project or that is appropriate. But you have the power to issue an approval based on staff recommendations of a proposed series of zoning amendments. You also have the power to not do that. There ain't no law in the world, and I learned this from Professor Stephen Dicus about the power of a zoning body. He said, when it comes to zoning amendments, the municipality is King Kong, because guess what you can do? You can do nothing. Now, I'm not saying that's a great solution. That's not a long-term solution, but you have tremendous power here. You could table this, and you could send a letter to the city council in the form that you already have and say, we've heard enough from our residents, and we're concerned about these numbers. Gosh, we didn't know about these 500 more students in the last 2 years, incoming students. You could table this and make a recommendation. It's all it could be. It's non-binding to the city council and the administration to say, we recommend that you explore a memorandum of agreement where the university, in exchange for our bodies taking action on these zoning amendments, which we favor in general, but we suggest that, say, 50% be allocated for third and fourth year students, for example, and you could work around those numbers. Now, that's one option you could do. You could literally not act on this now, and that would take some chutzpah to honor the time of year that we're in now with the lighting of candles. However, I acknowledge that this body may not have the nerve to say, we're just going to do nothing for a few months here, because we think that there are other bodies that need to move forward with memorandum of agreement. What you could do at the very least, and I would urge this, if you are not inclined to follow the advice of my once leader of maybe doing nothing is sometimes the best thing when you want to see something happen, is that you could approve the staff's recommendations. And folks listening here, everyone should understand that this body does not amend zoning ordinances. That's not within your power. Your power is to make a recommendation to city council, because that's our legislative body. So at the very least, what you could do is somewhere maybe, 15 pages within the packet or 10, 15 pages, that draft letter that I see there, I don't know if that's drafted by staff or one of the members, but there's a draft letter that says, well, we recommend that we add another item to when there's going to be a new dorm application, that you could have tell us what you think your projections are for enrollment. And you can go a heck of a lot further than that. You can say, listen, we know we can't make you do a memorandum of agreement, but we are urging you, we are recommending, based on input from the public, that you all, as a condition of you're taking this up, first reach a memorandum of agreement with the university on allocation of some of these beautiful new units to upper class people to help take care of this need that's going to arise in the next couple of years, 2-3 years. And there's no sign that they're going to cut back enrollment, because again, we have no power on that. And you could forward this to the city council with a recommendation that this thing be held in abeyance, because you don't have the power to do this, but that the city council can also put pressure on the administration to negotiate a memorandum of agreement that allocates a certain number of these new units, at least these next couple of buildings, to third and fourth year undergrads. The bottom line is, without an allocation like that, and frankly, it's a little offensive to see in the staff materials this sort of homage to the city's 10-point plan. Well, was it point 8 or 9 in there? Is we're going to have more housing for on-campus housing to take pressure off housing stock. In light of the 3,000 new students for 2 years running, it doesn't. If they house their new students there, first and second years, nothing's happening that's good for us for housing stock. The only thing that we're doing is we're enabling the university to increase the enrollment without being accountable for housing. So that's my comment. Thank you for hearing me out. And I really urge the city, this council, to either defer action on this for a short period of time, or to include a very strongly worded, unambiguous recommendation that the city council defer and put pressure on the city administration to take action on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Todd. Charles, do we have anyone else?
Yes, hopefully it's third time's a charm for Nick Persampieri. Nick, I'm going to unmute you.
Looks like Nick is on mute.
Nick, are you able to unmute yourself?
There, you look unmuted now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks so much for bearing with me, and thanks for all your work on this matter. I just wanted to say that I strongly support the amendment. As Mr. Schlossberg said, the great numbers of students, the student population, which is increasing, is displacing residents throughout the city. We're seeing more and more students, even in Ward 2. We need to do everything we can to increase opportunities for housing in the city. And I think this is a step in the right direction. I can't really comment on Mr. Schlossberg's recommendations for trying to leverage UVM. I just don't know enough about that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else, Charles?
That is it.
Okay, well, thank you all who spoke both this time and at our last one, and those who gave their comments during the public forum, which we, as I said during the public forum, is we'll include those in the public hearing comments as well. So I'll close the public hearing and want to bring it back to Charles and to Megan, because I know you had some updates after hearing some of the comments, particularly at the last one, that you had some suggested updates or changes.
So these suggested changes to the amendment are technical changes that I can review with you right now. So I can also share the amendment if you prefer, but this is a summary of what those changes are, and they are very technical. So in red text here, changing the word northwest to rear. This is to maintain consistency with the way this is dealt with in other places of the ordinance. The second change is in the use table. Bed and breakfast as a use was actually removed from the ordinance as part of the short-term rental amendment. So that should be taken out. Also, the word approved is recommended to be removed from this section 4.5.2E 7I. This references the UVM's internal approval of a land bank plan. And again, removing the word approved one other time. And then—
Sorry, just really quickly to clarify, this was a request from Scott Guston, just to make sure it was clear that approved did not suggest that it was to be approved by the DRB, which is how the Joint Institutional Parking Management Plan works.
Yes.
That's not the intent, so.
Thank you, Megan. And the last is in this final bullet, residential developments, adding the language following a permit approval after the ensuing 5-year period. That is it for the technical changes. I'm happy to review any of the intent or other material related to the amendment if you would like, but we'll leave it at that given our agenda.
There is also the communication, the memo in our packet.
Yeah.
And it addresses what some of the speakers have, the concerns that were raised about UVM's intent and any agreement between the city and UVM regarding housing. Could you just review that briefly as well?
Sure. So this is a communication from Tom Derenthal, who lives on Nash Place.
Sorry about
Oh,
that.
no, sorry. I think we're talking about the draft planning commission communication.
Oh, I'm sorry. Apologies. Yes, so this is a memo that would accompany the commission's recommendation to council. And I believe, Andy and Megan discussed this. Ultimately, what it does is confirms the commission's, your all opinion that the zoning change is needed and necessary for the housing goals of the city and the university, but that the commission does agree with some of the interest in pursuing a more tangible commitment by UVM to their future housing plans. And that is essentially the gist of this memo, stating support for the housing component, but expressing also an opinion that any agreement with the UVM should perhaps be stronger and the city should continue to pursue that.
Right, so this memo was provided since your last meeting at the request of Andy, just in response to comments and questions that you've been hearing. So it's been provided in the packet for your consideration. This would be in the form, like we were just talking about with parking, this would be in the form of a kind of separate communication that could come from you to the city council as this item gets referred to them if you're ready to do that. And it can be amended in any way before it gets referred. This is really, we wrote it to help facilitate the conversation, but this is really kind of Andy's intent and ultimately would be your letter as a commission.
Thank you for that. Yeah, the purpose of this is, as Megan and Charles said, was to address some of the comments that we heard that there should be stronger agreement between the city and UVM with regard to their housing plans and their student plans, and that this the zoning, the rezoning for Trinity Campus really should go hand in hand with that kind of a commitment and that kind of an agreement with UVM, that this shouldn't just be done in isolation. At least that's what my intent of this was. And we wanted to make sure it was in front of the commission for to go along with the discussion tonight. And with that, let me open it up to comments, questions from the commission. Would like to go first, Julia?
Can we just share that letter and have it on the screen, so people don't have to dig through the packet.
Yes, 1 second.
Page 18, is that right, Charles?
Yes.
Yes.
And as Megan said, we could look at this as a first draft. We could accept it as it is, or we could make any amendments that we want to it, because ultimately, if we do move this forward, it's the memo from the commission. So it would be one that the commission obviously would need to be behind.
Andy,
Yes. Alex.
is this about the extent of what we can do in making recommendations to the council?
It is talking about the extent of what we could do, but it is also, you know, agreeing that there ought to be further commitments or an agreement between UVM and the city going forward with this amendment. And we could make it clear, we could keep it as is. But that was what the intent of this was.
Thank you.
Michael?
First, thank you for helping spearhead this. I really appreciate this, because I think one of the things that we identified, and would be just a small add to this, and it can be worked on later, but is to, I think we all acknowledge that it's kind of curious that we have statutory authority to regulate the externality of parking, but not that of housing. And so this is a connection between land use and an obvious consequence for the neighborhood surrounding. And so, as a commission, I think we recognize that and have for the first time added some good transparency on enrollment and supply and demand dynamics. But I think just acknowledging that we as a land use planning body understand there to be these housing externalities and feel that if we could, we would regulate that, but we can't. And so therefore it's the responsibility of council to take up in the form of this MOU. I think kind of drawing that connection, it just helps emphasize the points that are already made, but sort of frames it in our responsibilities as a land use commission.
Anyone else? Alex?
Just want to give other people a chance to speak if they'd like to, since I've already said one thing.
Julia?
Thank you, Andy, for getting this started. I think this is a great overview of the promise and the difficulties of this proposal. I like your addition, Michael. I also think it would be great to have additional detail, and maybe Megan, you could give a recap of something that we talked about a few meetings ago about the city's specific authority with regard to housing. I mean, I know that Michael, you were just speaking to this, that we have the authority to make much more specific and operative recommendations about levels of parking than housing here in this specific case with UVM. But it would help to have additional language in this letter, I think, that could speak to the ability of the zoning amendment to request information from UVM about the number of units that would be provided, informational requests essentially, but the inability of the amendment to exceed that and ask for additional detail. So I wonder if we could provide more specific language to inform the council about that difficulty, that it's just being as specific as possible with them about the challenges of being unable to specifically require that this housing be reserved for upper class people. So upper class students.
Yeah, I think maybe to to kind of like blend the question you're asking and the suggestion that Michael had offered, we can help you add maybe a sentence, a second sentence in the beginning of the second paragraph, where it says, while it's outside of the commission's purview, because of statutory authorities, we could specifically cite the section of statute, which we refer to as 24 VSA 4413. And really what that does is provides limits on the authority of municipal zoning ordinances as they apply to not just educational institutions, but also public schools, City of Burlington municipal facilities themselves, state institutions. There are some others. So we could specifically cite that section. And I think to Michael's point, we could state that, you know, that allows us to have a more specific, not only zoning approach, but also regulatory approach in the terms of the kind of city's application of our zoning to a specific project for a defined set of criteria. So parking is one of them. You know, things like location is another one, but housing is definitely not one of those criteria. And then I think you asked a question about the information requirements, and I think, yeah, there could probably be an addition to the statement here about the addition of the requirement that information is provided, but that information cannot be used to, you know, condition a permit in any way if it would conflict with that statutory provision. Is that what you're thinking, Julia?
That's you know, I don't like it, but I think we have to, you know, let them know that that is the situation. Yeah, I think I also wonder if this letter could address in more specific terms what a possible agreement with UVM could look like, maybe referencing previous agreements that have expired, or you know, just are sort of informal at this point, and discuss possible courses of action that the city council could take, and just to facilitate that conversation, help facilitate that conversation between the city and UVM as much as possible. I am sympathetic to the comments that were raised about this being an opportune time to forge that agreement between the city and UVM. But I just want to say that there's sort of a challenging trade-off. There's a decision to be made about what is more pressing, whether it's more pressing to develop that agreement with UVM that could have an impact on housing in the city and for the university years into the future, or to provide that housing at Trinity in a more immediate basis through this zoning amendment. So that's just I think a tricky one.
I'll say, I think that the two can really go hand in hand. One of the reasons that I'm in favor of forwarding our amendment to the city council is, number one, I think in and of itself, the land use changes that we're proposing make a lot of sense for that part of the campus. I think the way it's been utilized isn't really appropriate for the campus. I think it could be done in a much better way. Having said that, I also share the concerns over the effects that building out that campus could have on the larger city. If it's going to create, you know, just bring in more students that will then ultimately end up needing housing in other parts of the city. And so I think this is an opportunity for the city council and the mayor's office to enter into some kind of an agreement with UVM. And I think our proposed amendment and that kind of an agreement can really go hand in hand. Just it's not up to us to deal with that agreement. It's really up to the city council and the mayor. So what I would expect and what I would think would happen is when we present this, if we do present it, when we present our amendment to the council, that before they act on it, they would work towards having some kind of an agreement with UVM to know better of how UVM intends to grow its student population, how it will deal with the juniors and seniors and others. That could all be known, I would think, before the council may act on this. So I think the two really do go hand in hand, but they almost have to deal with them both together and not piecemeal. And that's, again, why I'm in favor of moving this forward with the memo that goes with it. And I like the changes so far that have been suggested for the memo as well. Alex?
Andy, I have to say I agree with you, except that I don't, in that, I think I think our only opportunity here with the city council is we can't withhold our consent. We should withhold our approval or withhold our recommendation, our advice to move this forward, because until the administration develop an agreement with the university, because this is the opportunity. And, if we don't, then we get what they want and they move forward. It's really a pity, because I like just about everything about this. I mean, it seems to me blindingly obvious, of course, that the university should redevelop the Trinity campus, and good for them for having a being in demand. Higher education is pretty darn competitive.
I guess for me, as was pointed out, we're not approving and enacting the zoning changes. All we're doing,
making a recommendation, right?
But our recommendation would be, or at least my recommendation would be, to approve it subject to to this separate agreement with UVM as we lay out in our memo. And it's really, ultimately it will be up to the city council, and we can't control what the city council or mayor do with this. But
my recommendation would be to not approve it until they have an agreement. Just a little language change.
Yeah. And that could be fine as well. I think it gives actually more leverage to the city to have this in front of, to the city council, to have this in front of them, to be able to tell UVM, we're ready to adopt this, but before we do, we want to work on our agreement with you, as opposed to saying, we want to work on our agreement, and once we do, hopefully the planning commission will forward the zoning change to us. But I could see it going either way. I just think it's stronger if we give the city council all the tools it needs to move forward.
It seems like it would just be more awkward if we kept it here, even though it's, we have sort of relinquished any control over it and maybe not input on it, but any recommendation on it, if we approve it to city council. But I agree with you, Andy, that it makes more sense for them to be holding the cards at that point, to be looking at both this ordinance and negotiate any possible agreement with UVM. But at the same time, Alex, I hear you too about wanting to ensure that that we're moving this forward thoughtfully, if at all.
I'll also just add, based on some of the comments that I've heard from the city council, from city councilors, I can't say this is from the city council as a whole, but at least from some city councilors, and particularly, we've cited in the memo, there was some city councilors have communicated with us. I doubt they're going to move forward with this resolution until they've dealt with the student body issue, if you will, the impact on the greater city. So I would be surprised if they approved this without a separate agreement as well.
Isn't that ultimately up to the mayor, to the administration?
No, it's up to the city council and the mayor.
Good.
And UVM as a partner. I think that
obviously, and UVM, yeah,
an agreement requires UVM, yeah.
Michael?
I guess last point for me, and I'm definitely in favor of moving this forward with this memo. I think there's another aspect to this. This one is a hard one because housing is so closely tied to land use. And I think that's part of the tension in the discussion we're having. But this won't be the only issue that concerns the university that is either by coincidence or otherwise affects the work of the planning commission. At the same time, there's some other discussion going on with the city or some other problem or concern with the university. And what folks generally want is that there's some level of understanding as to what the process is in land use entitlement. And we've seen, a number of developments occur in South Burlington. I think it's good that housing is being developed. South Burlington is doing some interesting things, but at the same time, it's kind of disappointing that some of the faculty and staff housing that is being built there is not being built closer to campus to encourage that learning community. So, and I think being able to sort of appropriately consider land use questions in the right sphere would help with that in the future. So with that said, I think this memo is an appropriate way to sort of strike that balance and have council deal with the issue that's under their control.
So just before we continue to move forward with this, I'm mindful of the time. It's about 10 after 8. We still have the remainder of the public hearing for the South End Innovation District. And I want to make sure we get through at least the public hearing part of that, even if we're not able to act on the rest of the referral or the rest of the ordinance. But I want to at least get through the rest of the public hearing tonight. So on the Trinity one, we could finish our discussion tonight. We could decide to act on it or not tonight, or we could continue our discussion till the next meeting, so we could make sure that we're all satisfied and have a complete discussion. We could see a revised draft of the memo. If we're in support of the proposed changes that Megan and Charles proposed, we could see the final draft of that as well. So I guess what I'm saying is we could either bring our discussion tonight to a close without taking action, take the action at our next meeting, or hopefully come to a rapid close on this so we could get to the next item. And so I'll ask, is there a problem with deferring this, finalizing this discussion on Trinity till our next meeting?
Andy, I think just from staff's perspective, I think if I heard kind of 2 requests for changes to this memo, but no other discussion about the amendment itself. And I think just for us to be able to continue to support your work and move some things off your agenda so you can focus on other things, it might be helpful if we could move this on for you tonight, unless there are major objections by the commissioners.
Okay. All right, so are we able to bring this to a conclusion, Michael?
I was going to make a motion to move it forward.
With the report and the proposed memo as amended.
Correct.
And
motion to move it forward with the report and the memo as amended.
And Megan, do you have enough information to work on?
Yeah, and what I'll do is we'll incorporate the changes that you had asked for into this memo and send it to Andy on your behalf. And when Andy has approved the language of the revised memo, then we'll send it on.
Is there a second to that motion? See a second by Julia. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment that, I think this should move forward because, we are responsible for land use decisions, as Michael noted, and this is ultimately under the authority of the city council. So that's the rationale for my moving this forward.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I have to say, vote no on moving this forward. I think that it's like there's a flood in town and we're lining the banks of a tributary with concrete.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, and then I just have one quick question. During public comments, there was a question about measuring from this, the setback from the center of the street and what impact it would have if the center changes due to rerouting or redevelopment of the street.
Yeah, I had pulled up the a couple of slides to show that we had previously suggested some wording for this that follows a more traditional pattern of how we measure setbacks, which is from the front property line. But that was really confusing, I think, for the commission to grapple with, as well as for the public to grapple with, because the front property line on Trinity campus is actually set back pretty far from the road and from the edge of the sidewalk. So we modeled this after actually the way that I think it's another institutional core campus buffer is measured, which is from a center line of a road. And typically when the roads get aligned, we still have a center point of the line or of the road that we can measure from. But if you'd like, we can confirm that with DPW before the council acts on that portion of it.
Yeah, that would be good. Okay. Any other questions or comments before we act on the motion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, raise your hand or say aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
Alex. And Bruce, I don't know if you're there, but if you are you able to weigh in on the vote? So I would say on this one,
Bruce, we can see that you've raised your hand, but we aren't sure if are you able to speak? Let's do this. If you could maybe lower your hand, and Andy, could you ask him about the vote and see when he raises his hand?
Okay. Bruce, if you're support, I'll ask you if you're in support, raise your hand. And if you're, okay. All right. If you're, so would you lower it again? And then I'll know that it was for support. Okay. So Bruce voted in favor of it based on that. Good. So it passed with 4 votes and Alex against. All right. Thank you. So this will go to the city council with the report and the memo as we've discussed, and with the changes to the memo as well. Thank you. So with that, we'll close out item 6 and move on to item 7, which is the continuation of the public hearing for proposed ZA-23-01 South End Innovation District. Again, this is a continuation of our hearing from our last meeting where we had some technical problems. And so as we did before with the Trinity, we'll pick right up with the public hearing part of it. Charles, is there anyone who'd like to speak during the public hearing?
So far we have one. We'll start with Gordon and we'll go back to Nick Hersampieri after Gordon. And again, if you would like to speak about the South End Innovation District, please press the raise hand icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So Gordon, you're up.
Hi. Sorry about the wall of text earlier. I have a few questions, mostly the main focus of that being the Florida area ratio proposed in this. It seems like that would heavily reduce the density of any 6 to 8 story buildings that we're going to be having in this. I know that it's really 2.25. That just feels like you're having a maximum of a 2-story building on like taking up the full lot, especially with the fact that we have removed all setbacks in this proposal, it seems. Removing the setbacks invokes a lot of good imagery and something akin to like Georgetown or even downtown Burlington. And adding the Florida area ratio on top of that just kind of seems to change that a little bit and doom this to being kind of spires with grass around it, which I understand the need for stormwater, just the need for housing seems a tad more pressing. I'm also just a little curious as to why the area around like Cumberland Farms and Burlington Furniture, that is completely absent from this. It seems like a good mix for that, especially now that Pine Street will probably have less traffic on it as it'll be taking the new Lakeside Road. It just seems like that would be a good fit, and making it so the generator space is now an 8-story zoned area, but not Burlington Furniture or Queen City or Cumberland seems somewhat arbitrary considering the value that generator gives. I'm not saying those other things don't give value. It's just many of these things are about, it isn't kicking these businesses out to include them in the plan. It would just be allowing them a chance to potentially get a payout and move elsewhere and allow this to become a potentially denser community near downtown. And I was also, the justification for the 4 and 6 and 8-story specific height area map there was that you don't want to block views of the lake and the mountains and this kind of thing. But then the 4 and 6 stories also extends to the west side of Pine Street. I'm kind of the opinion that why not just allow it to be denser all over if possible, and maybe that won't fit in some instances and people don't have to build, it's just setting the maximum. I just want to say overall, I think that the commission and whoever else had a hand in this did an excellent job with it. It's like any change is better than the parking lots there now, just like I said. But I just think that the need for density and mixed use zoning in this proposal trumps many other needs. Yeah, I think that's my time. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you.
All right, next we will go to Nick. Persampieri.
Thank you, Nick Persampieri, Clark Street, Burlington. I have a couple of general comments and then a couple of more specific comments. Generally, I strongly support this proposal. I think it's what's needed for this underutilized area in the core of the city. We desperately need more housing, denser housing. I like the fact that it's designed to be walkable. My more specific comments, and I just wanted to comment that, you know, we're not really doing an adequate job getting more people to live in the heart of Burlington. Burlington population grew by 5.5% between 2010 and 2020. And at the same time, our suburbs experience much larger growth. Williston's population increased by more than 16%. You might have seen it, the New York Times published an interesting interactive map back on January 13th that showed the climate impacts of people living in different communities all around the country. And they had a map of the Burlington metro area. And it, you know, clearly illuminated how people living in the heart of Burlington have a much larger carbon footprint than those living in the surrounding areas. And in particular, the denser parts of Burlington did better by that metric than the more suburban parts. So we need to do everything we can to support more housing and denser development. My more specific comments are first on the height limitations. I absolutely think that we should permit 8 stories as of right in this area. There's been an attempt here to kind of create a buffer, have 8 feet allowed in the middle of the area, then graduating out to 6 feet and 4 feet. I certainly understand the need the desire for a buffer to the lakeside neighborhood. I don't understand why we need a buffer for the Pine Street Barge Canal or for Pine Street itself. I think it'd be fine to have 8-foot buildings lining Pine Street. I know that the buildings directly across the street from part of the area are 2 stories, but I really don't think there's a fabulous streetscape there that needs to be protected by building more lower height buildings. Parking, you mentioned trying to have parking around the perimeter of the area and leaving the core of it more for people walking and bicycling. That just seems to be aspirational, the way the ordinance is written. I wish there was some way to put more teeth into that to see that it happens. I would like to see residential uses allowed in more of the light manufacturing district. I think this is a good start. I think more can be done. I think more needs to be done around the city. I think we need to be considering allowing duplexes, triplexes, and quads in single family zoned areas. Going to section 4.4.3 of the ordinance, it states other accessory commercial uses, and in very limited cases, residential uses are permitted. That language concerns me a little bit. Why are you saying very limited when you're going to be allowing housing in a quarter of the light manufacturing zone? I'd consider changing that. Getting back to the 8-foot height requirement, I strongly disagree with the prior speakers who opposed that. You know, this is in the core of the city. At least the core of this area is really far from where people live. I mean, 8 feet high is not, 8 stories is not very high for a building. If you look about what we have nationwide, the idea that you cannot have a sense of community where you've got 8-story buildings is just wrong. There are plenty of thriving communities around the country that have 8-story buildings. And, you know, if we're not going to allow 8-story buildings here, where are we going to allow them in Burlington? This is the perfect place for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone
Maybe
else?
we have one more, Colin Larson. Colin, you're up.
Hi, thanks for letting me speak again. I did want to mention this. I'm also here as a part of the Vermonters for People-Oriented Places, VPOP. We had a number of people come to the meeting to speak. So I also wanted to voice my general support for this proposal. And I do, like Nick said, you know, I have a few, I guess, questions or concerns. I don't want that to take away from, you know, my general belief that I think this is a good thing to develop more mixed use areas in the city of Burlington. You know, as Nick said, I feel like this proposal is really de-emphasizing housing. You know, I understand that, you know, we want to create innovation and, you know, an artistic district for employment. You know, I don't think housing should take a backseat to that. You know, our goal should be a place where people can live and walk or bike to places they need to get, you know, ideally without the use of a car, right? And that's why included in this proposal is this recommendation that parking be included on the perimeter. Like Nick said, I think that should have more teeth. You know, when we're looking at the most productive uses of this territory, we shouldn't be ceding any of it to a non-productive parking lot or structure. You know, and I guess that was my question, there's a specific piece, an amendment here, trying to find it, that it defines the context of the parking structure, the dimensions of it. And I did want to ask, are we at a point in this where there is a proposal to build an above ground parking structure? Because if there is, I think we should consider not doing that. If anyone's been in the above ground parking structure in downtown Burlington, it's a pretty miserable place. I don't think we want to commit to putting that in what's going to be this new innovation hub. Again, as I said, it's kind of a waste of land. It's promoting more car dependence in an area where we don't want to do that specifically. So again, I apologize if that was already addressed in an earlier meeting or something like that, but I do want to voice my support for no parking in this zone. As I said, I think it's a good proposal overall, though, so thank you.
Thank you.
Andy, that's it for everybody who has not spoken during this hearing. We do have John Kahlo has raised his hand. John did speak at the hearing in November. So happy to let him speak if you'd like, or we can proceed however you prefer.
John, do you have new comments to make, or is just reiterating what you had said before?
Thank you, and I'll be brief. I think the only thing I wanted to add to prior comments was just the since the last public hearing, I've had several conversations with Megan and Charles, and I really want to commend them for just being so open-minded and considering comments as we've kind of worked through this amendment. So thank you. And I think the only thing that I wanted to add was this whole idea of do no harm and of an ordinance, and that if I had one general comment, it's that sometimes when I read it, it seems that the ordinance is a little bit too prescriptive, especially in trying to predict those or what a permitted use could be, mostly in a non-residential use. As we all know, the pandemic has created all sorts of dislocations, and in terms of how land is used, both in urban and suburban areas. And I think we really need to be as open and almost libertarian in a way to be open to new land uses that will complement the walkable, vibrant, pedestrian-friendly neighborhood that we're trying to create. And so, I think my comment about by allocating, having primary uses and secondary uses, and having some sort of a mathematical logarithm that will force a developer into creating square footage that he may not ordinarily want to, or the market may not really request, seems to it's not a really sound prescription for success. And the one thing I just would look at is the evolution of the Pine Street corridor, which is so comfortable and popular, and has really evolved over the last 30, 40 years without a lot of zoning oversight. But it's something that is unique and very marketable. And sometimes I guess a lighter touch may be more appropriate. That's in general my comment. Otherwise, I think this amendment reflects sound work and was very forward-looking. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and it sounds like that's our last speaker, Charles.
We've had so many speakers, I'm not sure if Michael Arnold has spoken yet to this. Michael, if you'd like to speak now.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to give a brief comment in general support and also to echo the concerns that other people would have about a FAR of 2 being too low. I think that's a pretty serious concern, and upping that allowed FAR to something more reasonable like 4 or 5 will still allow lots of green space and actually allow developers to get up to those 8-foot heights or 8-story heights that are allowed. So I'd have to consider increasing that. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
That is it for speakers, Andy.
Okay, great. Well, thank you to all the ones who spoke to us tonight, as well as at our prior meeting where we had our prior public hearing. With that, I'll close the public hearing part of this. Again, I'm mindful of the time. It's just after 8:30. Megan, I believe you have a presentation for us on this. And if that's the case, I wonder if it's better at this point to hold that off till our next meeting.
We do have a presentation prepared to respond both to the comments that you received in November that also address some of the comments you received tonight, as well as the revisions that we suggest, or changes that we suggest that are in the second draft in your agenda packet. Those are all highlighted. So yeah, Andy, it's up to you if you'd like to continue or continue tonight or push this to the next meeting.
Check in with the others on the commission. What your
Let's do it
preference is.
all in 2022.
3, 2.
Do you mean tonight? Do it in 2022?
We're here.
I'm not sure that we will be at our best, but
I agree with you.
my recommendation would be to hold off till our next meeting.
I think that'd be helpful as well, Andy. There's a lot to consider.
Okay, and Julia?
I'd be fine with either, but I'll go with.
Fair enough.
Andy, if I could just say, if it would be helpful, I can very quickly run through the presentation, just so as you all are thinking about it over the next couple of weeks, it has a little bit more context. Also happy to just close my mouth.
I actually think if we're going to have the bulk of our discussion at the next meeting, I think starting it off with your presentation will probably help us a lot to frame that discussion and to move that one along, as opposed to trying to remember some of it. So I think that will be a really good place to start off with.
I wonder, can we just ask a couple questions right now that are like one-off?
Sure.
Okay. Maybe, I mean, I know this will be covered in the next meeting now, but I'm just curious about the one-time floor plate standard exemption for the parking structure and how that works with the phasing of projects. And, just how I can appreciate, wanting to ensure that a parking structure of this sort is going to be functional and try to reduce the overall number of structures in the area and hopefully place them strategically. But, if there's another parking structure that's built prior, I'm wondering how this ordinance can sort of counteract that or, yeah.
Yeah, so just quickly on the numbers there, 30,000 and 60,000, those reflect both sort of standard practice in parking structure construction, just sort of efficient dimensions. The 60,000 number is about the size of the facility that the CCRPC, Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, outlined in their feasibility study for 68 Sears Lane. As far as phasing the project, yes, because most of these parcels in the district are very large. The developments could be phased in a way that existing surface parking is used, but as those sites are developed out, there's likely to be a demand to the extent that car ownership and usage is still sort of the de facto mode of transportation for most people, which it is right now. there's likely to be a need for a parking structure. And, should say that this is a common practice in not just North America, but in Europe and new developments of this sort of scale in Europe to build consolidated parking structures. And they're generally about this size. So that's where this is coming from, both to facilitate the CCRPC model that would likely include some sort of transit station if that's the direction the city would like to go in, or a purpose-built, privately built parking structure by developers. And again, this is a one-time exemption on lots that exist as of January 1st, 2023. So it wouldn't allow the sort of subdivision of parcels to create more and more parking structures, if that makes sense. I don't know, Julie, if that answered your question completely, but.
No, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anything else before we close this out for tonight?
I have
And we'll
one
s-
more. I did have a chance. Sorry to jump in, Andy. I did have a chance to review the helpful presentation on changes. I think it would be helpful to continue to look at that primary and secondary use distinction. I know that a lot of that is fed off of the public input that was received. But thinking through, some of the developments that have been proposed on site that, will benefit from the Brownfields grant, I wonder, how those would be treated. And then also just like, anticipating some of the secondary uses are sort of neighborhood serving rather. And so, just would encourage maybe before our next meeting, some more thought on those distinctions in the proposed amendment.
We can certainly do that, Michael.
Okay, good. Anything else? right.
Given the comments about floor area ratio tonight, I just think it would be good to return to that next time. And I know that some of the written comments that had come in were referencing the floor area ratio of existing buildings. So I think that would be good to wrap into that discussion.
Good. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So much far.
Good. All right. So we'll pick this up at our next meeting. Thanks all for your comments. And we'll close this item. We'll move on to the next. See, we've already dealt with item 8, so we're on to item 9, which are commissioner items. Are there any commissioner items?
I'd just like to say that it's great to have this amount of public comment and engagement, that it doesn't happen in every planning commission meeting. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who came and attended the Zoom and spoke tonight. We appreciate it.
Thanks for those comments, Alex. Anyone else?
The only other thing, just to kind of go back to the beginning of our meeting as a reminder, when we have the next meeting with you all next year, we will, as a staff, be in person here in City Hall, and we will also have the ability, if any members of the public would like to join us in person. So I think it'd be great if we were able to see some of you as commissioners there. I think it could help kind of add to the ambiance for those of us that are in the room here in City Hall.
Good. So that's an invitation for as many of us who can to join the live performance of this in person.
I'll be there.
Good. Thank you, Megan. Anything else? Anyone else? And we'll close that item, move on to item 10, which is minutes and communications. Is there a motion to approve the minutes and accept the communications? Motion by Julia. Thank you. Is there a second? Seconded by Alex. You're the only other one I could see, so you need to raise your hand.
I actually didn't read the minutes.
Oh, no.
So, I'm frantically scrabbling. A second.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand or say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have I see a hand up by Bruce, so we have our minutes and communications. And last item 11 is adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn? And wish everybody a happy holiday. Motion by Alex, seconded by Julia. Thank you. So we have our motion in a second. All those in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody, and have a great holiday season.
Thank you.
Thank
See you next year.
Happy holidays.
Yeah.
Bye now.